Let's thank the band for leading us in worship this morning. I appreciate y'all's ministry with us. Songs are so well chosen and so well done. And let's thank Martha for making the scripture come alive for us this morning. And really thank God for the story that represents and what it means for us. It was 1997, I think, when the time Titanic, the movie, came out. And Jenny and I were serving this church in Patronville, Indiana. How many of you know where that is? God bless you. Yeah, nobody. Jenny knows where that is. It's a spot on the highway. Anyway, we were coming back into church. We never go see a movie. It came out on Saturday. We went to see the movie. Went to church the next day. Something along that. Maybe it was Friday and Sunday, but whatever. Sunday morning, we were talking about going to see the movie, and it was epic, and nobody kind of knew just how epic the movie was going to be. Anyway, there was a girl in our youth group who heard us talking about the movie, and she said, "Stop. Don't tell me how it ends." I hated to burst her bubble. And in a sense, the passion of Christ is like that. Wait, don't tell me how this ends. Because we have this give and take between the passion of Christ and then the resurrection of Christ, the ascension of Jesus, where he is seated at the right hand of God the Father, the things that we've said in the Apostles' Creed. And we believe he's the king over everything, and that affects every reality in the universe. In a sense, we know where this is going. We know how it ends. And so you have to give the people in the story a little bit of credit because they didn't. And in the pressure, the tension of the moment, it is easy to lose sight of things, even things that we know. And so even for those of us who would claim Christ, even for those of us who would say we believe in the resurrection, even those of us who would say Jesus is Lord, we lose sight. And in the tense pressure moment of decision, we fail. And that's what we see in the story. As we have been going through the Gospel of John, point by point by point, we see people not really understanding Jesus, even those who thought they did. And we see Jesus doing things that are unexpected. So Jesus, in the last moments of his life, when we would expect him to kind of be thinking about himself, takes those precious few moments and he washes his disciples' feet. And those of us who know the story go, yeah, we get it. It's about service. But that orientation is everything. That flip in orientation is everything. And it's seen consistently again and again in the story. When Jesus could have been so frustrated, and think about all the times in the last couple of years you've been frustrated by other people. Jesus could have been so frustrated by the people closest to him who were actually actively working to betray him, or who would just fall over and deny him, pledging allegiance to the moon and not able to get one foot off the earth. He could have been so frustrated. What does he do in this farewell speech throughout several chapters in John? He's encouraging them. He's continuing to pour into them without missing a beat, giving them guidance and comfort and help, placing words in searing those words in their brains so that when it all kind of falls apart, they would remember and they would not lose heart. When they come to arrest Jesus, which is we did the Mac dedication last week, so this was the story at 8:15 and 11 last week. But when they came to arrest Jesus, the thing that John wants us to see so clearly is that Jesus is not out of control. You have this swirl of chaos around him, and literally the wheels are coming off. It's a train wreck, and every person you look to, Peter cutting off the priest of the ear of the servant of the high priest, and Jesus is in control, and he says, if you come for me, let them go. He protects his own in those moments when it just is out of control. Jesus is the one who's not out of control, and that's where we pick up the story today in John 18 and John 19. We continue to find groups of people or individual people failing to kind of get it. In fact, we're going to see three people interact with Jesus in this story. Pilate, the high priest, the chief priests, the religious rulers, and the crowd. And we're going to find ourselves in each of those stories, in each of those scenarios, in those moments of decision that we tend to act like the people did and less like Jesus. And then we also hear the call to be Christ-like and what that means in those kinds of tangible moments, in those moments of decision. And at the end of the sermon, we're going to have a time of prayer that's just about that. We confess that we fail to step up to the plate. We fail to understand our role, which is to give ourselves away like Jesus did. We, in those scenarios, would likely sacrifice others to save ourselves, and we consistently see Jesus sacrificing himself to save others. Now, where we go today, from the garden where Jesus is arrested, in John 18, we go to the high priest, and then to the Roman leader, who we know his name is Pilate, right? Pilate, who is at the Praetorium, or the place where essentially where the political leader, the Roman official would be housed. The traditional site of this is the Antonia Fortress. I think we have a couple pictures of this. And what you see there, the wall there is the temple. So this is just off the temple. This is on the north and west side of the temple. It was built and then named for Mark Antony, who you may know through history, some 30 years before Jesus. And somewhere around the year 70 AD, it was destroyed. So it stood for about 100 years. And what's interesting about the geography is that the clash or the tension between the religious world and the political world is right there. It's just all on the Temple Mount. And so you have both of those realities living in a daily coexistence that is uneasy. The temple where people are coming to worship, and here at the time of Passover, this is the day of preparation for Passover. A lot of religious festivity stuff, crowds have gathered, is going on, and then also the underlying and constant reality of Rome right there. Praetorium comes from the Latin word praetor, which means leader. So this is the place where the leader, the Roman leader, someone who would have taken an oath to oversee justice in that area. And there's the irony, isn't it? We know Pilate. We know how the story ends. We know Pilate, who is the leader, fails to lead. We see the one who has taken an oath to oversee the justice of the situation participates in the great injustice that gets Jesus to the cross. Pilate is the one who loses control of the situation, and Jesus continues to be in control. And Pilate allows himself to be the instrument of the religious leaders and the mob mentality of the crowd. Now, that's ironic because from the beginning, Pilate has said he doesn't want any part of this. He says to these Jewish leaders, you take him yourselves and you judge him by your law. Why are you bringing him to me? Why do you need me? And I think he intends to expose that they're not really on the up and up. Don't drive me into this. However, the Jewish leaders are persistent. We have no right to execute anyone, they say. Which is interesting because they're going to kind of talk out of two sides of their mouth. In this drama, they expose that they don't really care about justice. They just care about getting Jesus gone. So they talk out of both sides of their mouths. In John 19, they will say, we have a law, and according to the law, he must die. So which is it? Do they need Rome to help them, or could they have taken care of it on their own? And in fact, in John's gospel, they've tried to kill Jesus already twice. So they don't really haven't given clarity on what the charge is. Is it sedition that Jesus is a threat to Rome? Or is it blasphemy? He's claimed to be the Son of God. Was Jesus a threat to Rome? That's an ongoing and underlying question. What were they so afraid of? Were they afraid that he would lead an uprising and bring the fury of Rome down on them? Were they just looking for the easiest way to get rid of Jesus? Pilate is squishy. I don't know of a better word for it. He's squishy in the moment as a leader. He goes back and forth, literally, from the public eye back to his private quarters. And he comes out and says not once, not twice, but in those two chapters, he says 3 times this phrase, I find no basis for a charge against him. We hear how Pilate pleads with Jesus himself to step in and stick up for himself, which Jesus doesn't do. There's this interplay about power and how Pilate clearly has power, but he's not demonstrating any of it, is he? And Jesus doesn't get pulled into that either. He says, you wouldn't have any power except that it was given to you. It's as if Jesus is unwavering in his trust of God and his perspective on things. And we, of course, come to expect that because we know the end of the story, because it's Jesus, because this is how the story goes. But isn't it remarkable if we can feel the wonder of that? And then the religious leaders are trying to pass the buck as they're trying to get Rome to do their dirty work. Pilate finally says, okay. And here's what he does. He places a crown of thorns on Jesus' head. He's setting up this mock king scenario, which it's almost odd. This is Pilate's initiative. He has Jesus flogged, and then he puts a robe on him, a purple robe, to highlight the irony and the contrast. Here is your king bleeding in front of you. Now, we again know the end of the story. We get that that's actually how it happens, isn't it? But for them, it was about something else. It was about shaming somebody. Maybe it was Jesus. So, hey, message to Jesus, if you're Pilate, is don't show up at my office again. Don't make trouble. Keep your nose clean. But maybe there's a shaming of the religious leaders too. Like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put this guy in front of you, and I'm going to have him beaten, and then we're going to see the shame that you're bringing. You're going to see the reality of the violence that you're trying to inflict. I'm going to stand him in front of you, in front of the crowds, and surely then you'll have some humanity. But that's not what happens, is it? The thing comes to a point when the people of God turn on the Son of God. And they start shouting, crucify him. They start shouting things like, we have no king but Caesar. Now, isn't that ironic? These are people that recite 3 times a day that there's one God, that they have one king. And now they're using whatever means they can. We have no king but Caesar. There's not a single one of them that believed that. The story just rips open the humanity of the situation. And that's a pretty heavy topic for a 10:05 on a Sunday morning during spring break. And we acknowledge that. We ought to acknowledge that. It's pretty heavy. You know, when we think about the crowd here, so you've got Pilate, you've got the religious leaders, and then you have the crowd, who is, as some scholars say in John's gospel, is a character unto itself. The crowd itself is a character. We don't know exactly how big the crowd was that day. It could have been 12 people. It could have been hundreds of people. We can assume that some people are going about their religious festivities, duties, and going about their day, and they get kind of pulled over into it. We were at Target yesterday, and a police car rolled up on something going down in the parking lot. And Jenny and I were like, do we kind of stay and watch? Or it was tempting, but we went on into Target because we had pressing business to do. You can imagine some of the people being in that, that tension that day. Holy stuff happening at Target. Holy stuff happening in the temple. You can imagine that there were money changers and merchants who Jesus had gotten on their bad side, perhaps, who could have seen this going on. It's probably safe to say that some of the very same people who had been there on Sunday for the palm procession, waving their palms and saying, Hosanna, which means save us now, that image of salvation that we hear on Sunday is now a triumphal call for injustice. Less than a week later, crucify him, crucify him. There's a whole stream of study on mob mentality, how we can become a character unto ourselves in the crowd. And we'll do things in a crowd that we would never do individually. Like, actually, there seems to be a different set of rules for us when we are together than when we are separate. And we don't even realize we're doing this. Let me give you a simple, silly, harmless example. The wave. How many of you have done this at a ball game? We're going to do this Easter Sunday. We're not, actually. Maybe we will. We'll see. We'll just see where the Spirit leads us, I guess, on Easter Sunday. But, so you've done the thing, right? You stand up. You're all enthusiastic. You whoosh. What if somebody did that this morning by themselves, just one person? I'm not going to ask any of you to do it. It would be so awkward, wouldn't it? The rules say, yes, all of us can do this together, but it's everybody or it's nobody, right? If it's just one person, that's weird. Same is true with clapping, and this does apply to church. Have you ever been in a church service where there is one person clapping? And then everybody else in the room goes like this. It's awkward. And of course, most often, they're clapping off beat, right? So that makes it worse. There are different sets of rules sometimes for us as a group than as individuals. And some things that are okay in a crowd are not okay individually. And so that can be simple, cute, and harmless, or that can be destructive and dangerous. Can you imagine that nobody in that room would be an executioner in the space, in that scenario? Nobody in the crowd would say, I'll be the one to kill an innocent person. But somehow the crowd got there. And we need to think about that because we are both individuals and we are a collective. And we've got to think about the rules in both places. When we speak of spirituality, that's why we sometimes talk about personal spiritual disciplines and also social justice. It has to be both things. We have to think about how we act together because we'll do things together that we would never do alone individually. And the crowd decides that they are okay with this man dying. That in their set of rules as a collective, this is acceptable. And so here you have with Pilate and with the high priests and the religious leaders in the crowd, sort of the same dynamic. They're willing to sacrifice somebody else to save themselves. Let's think about what they're sacrificing. What is Pilate giving up? His integrity, his leadership, his role to make sure something like this doesn't happen. When it comes down to it, he looks out for himself. There's a lot of pressure on Pilate, don't get me wrong. In fact, I think maybe the question for Pilate is, what if I let this guy go and then he does lead a rebellion against me? Or what if the crowd rebels and he's just playing the dynamics of the people? It's not unheard of for a Roman official to be fired for getting this kind of thing wrong. It wasn't completely unheard of for a Roman official like this to get a little note from the emperor when they really mess up. And the note says, go kill yourself. That's the world that Pilate lives in. It's not maybe as easy as it sounds. But hard or not, he relinquishes his role to save himself, or to even make sure that he doesn't get caught up in something. What about the religious leaders out there yelling, we have no king but Caesar? What are they relinquishing? But the very religion, the very integrity of that gives them their life, their relationship with God, sacrificed for something. It sounds silly, it sounds dramatic, but it's what we do. What about the crowd? Ultimately, the crowd gives up that individual responsibility, that calling on each one of us to do the right thing, no matter what anybody else says. And so this is how the story ends. Finally, Pilate hands Jesus over to be crucified. Consistently, everybody does the thing that they shouldn't do. It is almost a comedy of errors. It didn't have to happen, and yet it did. The crowd, the high priest, and Pilate all given over to the same instinct to save themselves, but not Jesus. This is where we know the end of the story. All of this is unfolding around him. Jesus hardly speaks a word. He doesn't do what probably you would expect. He doesn't try to protect his popularity, which he has gained a following. He doesn't attempt to leverage the prestige he has garnered from being among the people. He doesn't try to promote his power. He could have called on an army of angels, one of the Gospels says, and kind of taken care of business. He doesn't do any of that. And the point is this, that Jesus didn't come to make his life about popularity or prestige or power. He came to give his life away. And he's consistent to the end in his desire to do so. And then to call us to be his community of people in the world to do the same, to think of the little scenarios that play out in our lives or the big scenarios that play out in our lives and ask us how we will respond. John Ortberg explains it this way. It's as if Jesus said, I will lay down my life for people who don't understand. That can buy a little time. That can buy a little space. A community can be formed, and out of sacrificial love, it can change the world. Today, our time is built around a confession and a calling, a confession that we don't act like Jesus in these kinds of situations, that we often look out for ourselves and protect ourselves and our own at the expense of others, when Jesus simply refuses to do that. And so it's a confession that we don't get this right, and a calling, a way of being in the world that resets us to the way of Jesus. Because you and I are part of this community that he created, this community he died for, the time and the space that he created for something different, for a different kind of response. You can probably think of a time when you sacrificed your integrity, what you value, for yourself, for something maybe silly, maybe in a big or small way. You can also think of a time where you were able to have the courage that it took to do what was right, no matter what. And so our prayer time today is about that, kind of finding ourselves in the story and consistently moving ourselves with Jesus to the end